Hello, Rogers. Welcome back to Let's Talk About IT. We're trying to do our best to find the best experts in the area to talk about IT and to let us understand what are the new trends in IT and how we can jump in IT careers if you'd like to. Well, today I'm honored to have our wonderful guest Chase Keaten. He is a UX expert and he's going to talk about UX for us today. And well, let's start our questions. Hello, Chase. How's everything with you?
Uh, Things are going great. Thanks for
Going
asking.
great. That's good. So let's just start by introducing yourself, if you can, please.
Okay. So my name is Chase Keaten. I've been working in IT for about 13 years. About 8 of that is with UX, and the other roles that I had were I worked as a support, as somebody who supported people out in the field, in addition to business analysis. So I've kind of worked all across a lot of different roles throughout IT.
Wow. So what is IT for you?
Is that personal or professional? Should we kind of go
Both.
both? All right. So professionally, it's a playground. Like it's a wonderful spot. Technology has really evolved. In the beginning, back in like punch card days and like the rise of IBM, technology was really a tool that people would just kind of pick up and use. And lately, the pendulum has kind of swung to the entire other direction, where like in a lot of ways, technology is using us. Like we're the product of a lot of our apps right now. But at the end of the day, the way pendulums do, eventually we'll kind of reach this equilibrium, and it's just amazing to watch how much the world has changed. I can remember times where you didn't have the internet. You didn't, and it's funny because the whole notion of expertise even has shifted. Expertise used to be deep knowledge of a subject. And now it matters less about like what you know, and it matters more about your ability to locate things. You know what I'm saying? Like the information's value is shifted to the knowing of information, to the being able to find information, because we have so much more information at our fingertips. When I was in second grade, I had to have the Encyclopedia Britannica in order to figure out exactly what was going on. And then by the time I was in middle school, this may date me a little bit, I got to listen to that that told me I was getting online. And after about 2 minutes of waiting, I could actually load up one of the first Wikipedia pages, right? And that transition has really kind of changed what is expertise, what is information. So personally, it's been wonderful to kind of see these trends and note them. Professionally, IT is a fulcrum. IT is how you can make people more productive, how you can pivot amazingly quickly. And like even COVID's a great example. There are so many clothing manufacturers right now who are producing face masks and who have pivoted to a more online style of business. And that's helped them survive this. Where if an event like this had happened 20 years ago, it would not, we wouldn't have been able to go as fast. So thinking about technology as a fulcrum and thinking about technology as a way to kind of maximize your ability to respond to the market makes it a really exciting place to be professionally.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So let's go jump into the subject. So what is UX? Everybody knows like UX. What is
UX is kind of a hot topic, and it's been like a secret hot topic for about 25 years. UX stands for user experience, and user experience it's kind of like a mindset. It's a practice. It's all about not just caring about what you're building, but caring about who you're building it for and what they're interested in, and kind of what they did before they access that and what they want to do afterwards. User experience are kind of like the intersection of technology and psychology is where UX lives. whenever you build something, it's easy to forget that there's actually going to be somebody using it on the other side. And it's really easy to tunnel vision as you become an expert in that particular thing to kind of forget that there will be people using this that have never seen that before, that haven't been in all the meetings that I've been, that haven't been in all the strategy discussions, that might have lost, that just don't have any of the context that I have. So UX looks to kind of bridge a gap and make things accessible to everybody. For example, a good example of like user experience is like whenever you download a new app on your phone, do you go to YouTube and like watch a tutorial of somebody playing around with that app for 20 minutes? I don't have that kind of time. So a lot of UX is knowing that people are going to get in and experiment with your tech and making things really friendly to a beginner, but still making things advanced enough so that somebody who really knows what they're doing can get deep in whatever it is that you're building. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that provides a little bit of a definition. When my 7-year-old daughter asks what I do, I say I try and make computers as smart as people because people are very, very smart.
Yeah.
And that's you explain like I'm 5.
Mm-hmm. Well, you kind of answered that second question, why the UX is so important, but let me rephrase that question. What if software company, they just, they doesn't care about UX. They start doing their things, should be fancy enough or beautiful enough as interface, and that's it.
Remember Kodak?
Uh-huh.
Like they're definitely examples of companies that stopped caring about what their users want, and just kind of did the ostrich head in the sand thing. At the end of the day, UX is kind of like a mutually beneficial practice because the marketplace, especially the digital marketplace, is so competitive that if you're not giving your customer what they want, they have a myriad of other options to get it from. So if you choose to ignore how people are thinking and feeling as they engage with their product, you're going to lose out. You're going to lose market share. You're eventually going to die if you don't have that ability to pivot, if you don't have that ability to be flexible, and if you don't have the ability to really consider what people are thinking and feeling as they engage with your product.
So what is UX design? Well, you just said it's like psychology and design interaction. So what is it in design function? Like,
well, it's a very broad question. I'm going to kind of try and piecemeal that out into a couple different things. Part of design is knowing what works already. If let's pretend that we're designing an app for Rogers Public Library, and it allows anybody to find any book and anybody to find any talk that anybody's given recently. So it's very fixed around kind of your assets that are fairly static, which is books, and some more dynamic assets, which are like talks and various other offerings that you have with the community. Where would you expect a menu for that to be if you're accessing it from your phone? Like where on the screen? Top
left.
Top left, maybe top right. If there was a search for it on your phone, where would you expect that to be?
Top of the page.
Top of the page. And see, these are things that you've learned through interacting with tons of different applications. Now, just because those are where people expect them to be, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put them there. But there are a lot of times where you can lean on people's expectations so that there's no pain in them looking for the search bar, or there's no pain in them looking for the menu, right? So that's kind of one aspect of kind of what UX design is know what people are used to and know what works. Another huge aspect of UX design is understanding call to action, understanding what somebody wants to be doing on a page and kind of what their primary actions are, and then like what their secondary and tertiary actions are, and making the actions as easy and as obvious as they need to be. Because if you just design a page that's all primary actions, you're literally just going to be designing like button, 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 link, right? It's not going to help them do anything but do those things. At that point, you're not really adding value to the user. But if your primary job is to let somebody reserve a book, like in that fictitious app that we were talking about for Rogers Public Library, maybe reserving a book as the primary action, but you can also request additional copies of the book, recommend the book to a friend, maybe share the book through the app. And so kind of those secondary or tertiary actions, they still need to be able to be done, but they don't need to be given the same visual weight. Maybe it's an icon rather than a button. Maybe it's something that's easier for somebody to interact with on a more occasional basis rather than a primary one. So those are just some examples of like the psychology of UX design. You have to understand your user, you have to understand what they want, and then you have to kind of look within your toolbox to figure out the right way to deliver value to them based on kind of their hierarchy of needs, their goals, and you knowing the value that you're providing.
So let's talk about UX, process. Like you just said an example, like let's create an app for Rogers Public Library. So should we start by studying our users first or studying other library apps? Or it's like several process, during the same time, like we should start doing 1, 2, 3, 4 in same time.
Yes. I mean, you've already shown a lot more maturity than a lot of people that I've dealt with in the industry. Most people, they'll find a solution and they'll start shopping for a problem to justify budget to do it. But in reality, the best thing that you can possibly do is work to understand your user and get like an organic idea of their problems, because maybe we think that the app they need for Rogers Public Library is the ability to reserve books. But really what they want to do is they want to reserve space, create community events, things like that. And so by talking to our users, the community space app looks a lot different than the book reservation app, even though both apps would be the Rogers Public Library app. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then as you start to understand the shape of the problems that your users are having, then you can start doing the competitive analysis activities. You can start doing deep dive interviews. You can start figuring out what are the emotions people are experiencing. And you can start widening the experience. Like, okay, you want a community-based app, but like, what were you thinking or doing before you wanted that? Like, were you experiencing like a social networking and you were feeling like maybe I need to connect with more people in real time? Were you shopping? Were you doing something completely unrelated to technology and you were just reminded, you know what, I really need to kind of re-engage with the community? And then after you re-engage with that community, what do you want to do with that? Is that something that you want to share online? Is that more of like that's a phone call that I want to have? So understanding the psychology, not just of the experience of what's happening inside your application, but the stuff that happened before and the stuff that happened afterwards allow you to really create like a cohesive experience and something that those are the things that start bridging boundaries and really helping people be people the way they want to be, right? By understanding that full spectrum of experience.
Good. So, something else. What is UI? UI, not you and I.
Well, we're people. No, UI is user interface, and it's kind of an entry level question when you're talking to somebody about UX, because the more seasoned people are, the more they work to separate the concept, that Venn diagram of UI and UX. People who are just kind of, they're like, okay, cool, you understand your user, and then you just build the screen. So really UX is like the tools with which you're building the screen. And it is, but it isn't. Like UI is simply a delivery mechanism. I mean, I can still remember the days where I could only get a computer to do a thing from a command line, before graphic user interfaces, before GUIs, before icons and windows, and even pre-mice. And the UIs have evolved in such a way that they're starting to kind of predict what you need. And there's a lot of good from what a UI is, but a UI very much is kind of like a vehicle for user experience, and it isn't necessarily user experience by itself, if that makes sense. The UI is kind of the train tracks for which you to kind of provide the entirety of the user experience, but it doesn't necessarily always account for the train station before, the train station after. Not to belabor the metaphor, but it really lays the groundwork for you to provide that experience. Because at first you're kind of receiving and trying to understand what people want and what people need, and then the next step is to understand how they're reacting to what you're giving them to. You know? And so UIs are kind of that middle step in now you're providing the experience. You're not just kind of you're providing that experience. How are they interacting with it? And your UI is the primary way for you to kind of change the experience.
So, well, another question about UI. Well, do you think that the UX designer can also be the UI designer, or they're two different, you know?
Knowledge in one can really help inform your skill set and knowledge of the other. In general, the people who are recruited as UX designers straight out of college normally come from like two backgrounds. They either come from like kind of like a psychology, anthropology, like a very soft skill, empathy driven background, or they come from like a very visual design where there's a lot of talk of like topography, graphic design, angles, understanding space, contour, color theory. And don't get me wrong, there is overlap there. I would argue that strength in one tends to translate multiplicatively with strength in the other. Like the people who are the best designers I know have a great tool set to build from a UI skill set, but they also have like the deep empathy and knowledge and desire to iterate that comes from like that much deeper UX skill set. Does that help clarify that question?
Yeah, very much. Well, I have another question actually that's like, but let's get back to the beginning of this conversation. You said psychology and computer science or human-computer interface. Well, what percentage do you think psychology plays? Like 70% of UX design, or 50%, 30%?
It's hard because I don't want to like belittle clinical psychology. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, things that have helped me in my role as both like a designer and a user researcher have involved a lot of psychology, a lot of like Gestalt theory, color theory. When I'm interviewing somebody, watching what their eye contact looks like, watching what their body language looks like, intentionally using language that doesn't bias them towards positivity or negativity. Like things like instead of saying, was that an enjoyable experience for you, which actually biases you towards a positive response, I'd say describe that experience. I would keep things as neutral as possible. So knowledge of psychology is really helpful in kind of like building a UX skill set, and it's extremely important in research. But at the end of the day, it's almost more empathy than psychology. Psychology is very like cerebral. You know, it's very white paper, and that's not to say that empathy can't get that deep, because it can, but empathy, I feel, is more grounded in emotion than like stimulus response, if that makes sense. It's more grounded in the ability to understand someone else's perspective, even if you don't end up adopting it, but just knowing how somebody is thinking and feeling and understanding kind of the things that trigger joy in them or the things that trigger less than joy. You know, we could get into a long discussion about dark UX at some point here.
Dark UX.
But I would kind of try and redirect you from like psychology to empathy. It's more important to understand where somebody's at than to like necessarily like diagnose them. Yeah.
Well, you just said something like dark
UX
and color theory or theories.
Different things.
Okay, of course they're different things, but let's just explain what are these things.
So, like, really quickly, color theory. Using warm colors is generally a good idea. There are lots of colors that have specific connotations that you might want to avoid. For example, there have been websites that have failed because their primary call to action, the thing they wanted their user to do, their add to cart button was red. And it feels bad to click the red button. Nobody wants to click the red button. Nobody wants to like have that emotional reaction of launching the nuke, you know? That's kind of what the red button
Mhm.
suggests, right?
Mhm.
So, like, color theory is just kind of understanding the psychology or just kind of the gut visceral reaction of kind of how people interact with color. Dark UX is something completely different. And sometimes it's like playful. Like, have you ever opened a recipe recently that you found online?
Yeah.
Yeah, you notice that people are like, they'll tell your life story, what color their dog is, they'll give you a huge anecdote, and basically, finally, at the end, you'll finally get to your actual recipe, the thing you were looking for. Like, that's an example of people knowing that they clicked a link to get to the recipe, and the author of that knows that you have to at least partially parse that stuff, right? And so that's kind of subverting expectations, and I would kind of call that like the beginning of dark UX. It's like, I know what you're here for, but I'm not going to give that to you until you go through what I'm here for. And I want you to click this link here. I want you to buy this particular kitchen gadget. You know, like that's how people are trying to monetize recipes. But dark UX can go a lot darker than that. Like, for example, there are certain memberships online that you literally have to Google and go through a YouTube tutorial of 20 minutes of how to unsubscribe from them. You know, kind of like recurring charge type things. You'll also find this a lot in like games where you'll actually have right next to an X, which is a lot more difficult to tap than your average X, because what they do is they make it so that you have to tap exactly on the X rather than like a boundary box around it. And then right next to that is actually a link to something for you to buy. And so you try and tap that X a few times and you end up looking for, oh, great, I'm on this thing, you know? And so there's some dark patterns and there's some dark UX out there. There's also like shame opt-outs too. Like, have you ever noticed you'll be scrolling an article and you'll get an interruption, and instead of saying, hey, would you like to donate to this cause, yes or no, it'll say, they'll have a button saying, no, I don't wish to donate to this cause because I'm a bad person. You know, or like something to that regard. And so there's like shame clicks. Like dark UX it's out there, unfortunately, but it's something worth paying attention to, and it's something worth voting away from with your dollars as you encounter it. I would encourage anybody who sees a pattern that doesn't jive with them to not spend money, to not click the link. You know, like it just. Do what you can to not reward that behavior, because the more that behavior is rewarded, the more that people are incentivized to include those dark patterns and things that they're making.
That's amazing when people, smart people use their smartness to, annoy other people. Like, just okay. So I have another question. Can we, or should I say, studying for example, website visitor behavior can be done with JavaScript. Like if hovered on certain text, then the user is actually, if hovered and stayed on a certain paragraph, then the user is really, like this paragraph.
It's hard to track engagement with things like that. And it's like we actually have access at JB Hunt to a lot of different programs that help us track. For example, we lean heavily on a handful of different analytics tools, some of which really track like things like page views, entry points, exit points, and you can start to distill a lot of good information around stuff like that. Like if they always jump in on this page, but it's not your front page, should you really spend a lot of time remodeling your front page, or should you try and figure out where that link is coming from? Because that can help you understand how people are getting to your information. But we also have things that record how people behave once they're on the site. And those seem like a panacea at first because they give you some great insights to like, wow, that person's cursor, they highlighted that word, they went over here. But the problem is you only have their digital behavior. You have no idea what they're doing in real life. So you might have somebody with like a 20-minute session on your screen and the mouse is wiggling back and forth, and in reality they're cooking dinner and their toddler is just sitting there wiggling the mouse, right?
Yeah.
So like it's really hard to...
Yeah, you cannot trust the results.
With just quantitative data, you lack context. And with just qualitative data, you lack the ability to get people to open their wallets and fund things. So a large portion of what I do is I try and mix that quantitative data with the qualitative data to make arguments to make sure that we're building the right things at the right times.
Looks interesting.
It's fun.
Yeah, it is.
Always a different day.
Well, yeah. Well, in your opinion, what is the good example of UX website or application, or both?
I should begin by stating that this opinion is not reflective of my employer and more reflective of my personality, because I should be saying jbhunt.com. And don't get me wrong, it's made a ton of improvements, especially since I've been there and I've seen some very talented designers work on it. And don't get me wrong, it's actually a pretty good site, but like the pinnacle of solid UX, I would say something that's been true for me for a while, even through its evolutions, is probably Airbnb. Airbnb on the desktop, Airbnb on the phone, Airbnb on the tablet. You have 3 different nuanced experiences that are themed similarly, colored similarly, and super freaking functional. Like, you don't have to deal with stuff that you don't want to deal with. Airbnb has all the trains of solid UX because they understand that once you've settled on a destination, you're looking for a place to stay. So you can really see like the tiered architecture, what they're doing. So first they ask you, where do you want to go? And then they start drilling down to kind of where you want to be while still protecting people and not giving out full addresses. And then once you start taking a look at the different places you can stay, it's very friendly as far as showing reviews and comps and giving you a general idea of where things are. And because of that, I think it shows a huge dedication to research, a huge dedication to understanding why people who are visiting are there to visit. And it shows how seamless an experience can be, like across the digital landscape. Like I love the fact that I can be scrolling it on my phone and then pull it up on my computer, and it's a seamless transition. Very, very few companies have done that right, but I think Airbnb is a good example of that.
Wow, I think so. But I have to, say something that Rogers Public Library actually does not endorse any application or software or any trademarks, that you may hear during our events. Okay. Yeah, that's.
I like that blanket statement. It's very nice.
Well, yes, of course. Well, so what are the best resources for, tech ed in UX, especially like?
There are certain things, like certain texts that are pretty important. Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. It comes up all the time. It's primarily geared towards website design, and it's not as great at responsive design, but the foundational knowledge that's there is superb. There's a lot of resources with like Nielsen Norman Group. That's one of the primary certifications with UX is to be NNG certified. So that's definitely something worth exploring if you're interested in that. There are a ton of articles, like there's Usability Hub, there's UX Matters. There's a whole bunch of places where you can get any kind of information that you want to begin to kind of understand the world of UX. I also wouldn't shy away from things like Reddit. There's r/user experience, which is can be very helpful, and you actually see professionals answering really well there. So there's fairly good community engagement there, which is nice. But overall, there's a lot of places to dip your toe in. But the nice part about user experience is there's such diversity that draws people there. Like I can show you a step-by-step block of like, if you take these classes and you're really interested in UX and you follow this general college curriculum, and if you really target internships that are UX focused, that's probably like your cleanest way to land a UX job. But I have people on my team who don't have college degrees who are amazing. I have people on my team who come from like an anthropology background. I have people on my team who started off as coding. They're like, coding's great, but people are more fascinating, and they just gradually transition to user experience. It's a home for a lot of different mentalities. And one of the things that's been so wonderful as part of my journey throughout UX is just the incredible thought diversity. There isn't just one school of thought, and the practice itself is very questions based. It's, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And so it invites a lot more discussion than you just wrote yourself into a loop in that JavaScript. So I feel like it has a certain longevity. No offense to Java. I mean, Java is often my savior.
Java accepts.
But you know what I'm saying? Like it's people are always changing.
Yeah.
And UX is kind of the study of people in technology.
Well, yeah. Do you know that you can access LinkedIn Learning using Rogers Public Library card number? Yeah, because we have Libby.com and Libby now is LinkedIn Learning. So there are like tons of UX courses and computer courses that, are accessible for our patrons, which is,
Sounds
that's
like a powerful
one thing
resource.
that, public library patrons don't really think that they can really have like good technology courses, big wide variety of courses on LinkedIn using their public library card number, which is something that we offer for our patrons. Yeah, and we have a new book on UX design for developers. But this is for developers. I don't know why for developers, as if there is a UX design for non-developers.
I don't know. It's hard. There's arguments in the community whether it's better to be like full stack, like I'm UX and I'm writing the front end code and I'm making sure that all the services make the right calls, versus just having that pure UX background. There's strengths and weaknesses, because the deeper you get in your career, it's often stronger to go deep in one field. And so at some point, having that full stack specialization can hurt you because while you can do everything, what do you do that differentiates yourself from anybody else? So, but there's a great power in having the full skill set to not only understand the design aspect, but the development aspect. For people who choose to kind of embrace both, I would caution you, it's going to be tempting to make trade-offs. Like, for example, if one of the nice things about staying interdisciplinary is that I can just fight for UX design. And then if a developer comes in and says, actually, if we did it like this, I understand it's a cost to the experience, to the user experience, but we can do it 3 times faster. I can still, as a UXer, advocate for, well, let's just do it the best for the user that we can. But when that role's the same, oftentimes it's going to be less about that push-pull and that tension and finding the right choice based on that user, that product, all that stuff. And it's going to be a little bit more about, well, cost is X, so we're just going to do it that way. And I think it's important to continue to have those conversations of gentle conflict, of I represent this place, you represent this place, let's respectfully find the right thing to do with this particular scenario. And you shortcut having that conversation and the fruit that conversation can bear when you bring both practices in one person.
That's really good. Well, something just came to my mind, like, what do you think the future of UX or computer design in general? It's I know it's a vague question, but
I think right now there's a big movement from a UX research standpoint to really go deep into empathy and understanding your qualitative data and also pairing that with kind of quantitative studies. So I think what you're going to be looking to see out of the UX practice in the future is you're going to see a lot kind of deeper exploration of why people are where they are, and then the deep data to back that up. Because some of the best insights that I've ever found are when you find those mismatches. When I sit down and I test somebody and I have them go through a prototype and they struggle so hard and they're nervous and they don't feel like they did a very good job, and I see the software not performing very well. And then afterwards, I asked them, how did they feel about that experience? I'm like, this is so much better than what I had. And that mismatch, that they felt super good about it, but I saw so many things where the software failed the user. And I'm being very clear, I'm not saying the user failed. If the user fails, the software didn't do its job to begin with. So in essence, in places where that prototype or that software failed the user and the user still felt great about it, that mismatch, I know, is something that I really need to deep dive on, because we're doing something right in that tone and something wrong from a software perspective in being able to deliver to their capability, being able to deliver to what they want to do from a goal perspective. It felt good, but it didn't do the right thing.
Yeah.
So I think the future of UX is going to be really kind of bringing that up and bringing that conversation up. Another thing that's all about the future of UX is it's a skill set that can be learned by everybody. And when I have developers and product managers and the people who are writing the checks making advocating arguments on behalf of the user, like, that's how I know that a place is matured, right? Like, that's how when everybody is kind of choosing to champion for the user, that's where you start to see like exponential growth as far as what a particular team or company or application can deliver. So look for that as kind of a sign of the future from UX from like within the industry. From the outside, it's going to look like smarter data collection. Like, I think people are done with the interrupting surveys, right? Like the NPS, the Net Promoter Score, which is kind of the be-all, end-all survey that a lot of people lean on, is starting to kind of get debunked because there's a lot of reasons for that, and I don't want to get into that because my soapbox is only so tall. But people are going to stop interrupting you for surveys, and we're just going to get better and better at collecting the data without you being aware of it. And in a lot of ways, there are some places that are already doing this really well. I mean, Google knows what you're searching for.
Yeah.
Facebook knows exactly how fast you're swiping through posts and exactly what posts you're lingering on.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, it's not like we don't have that data, but I think you'll see that used more and more. I think you'll see a lot more companies kind of come up to that level of, okay, we're beginning to understand the psychology of what you're doing when linked with the data of how you're doing it.
Wow. Wow. Well, that can make, people, or some people, freaked out, like, oops. Well,
No, it's one of those knowledge.
Yeah,
knowledge is neutral. It's the application of knowledge that is either terrible or amazing, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know,
everything can be terrible or amazing. Yeah.
But it's important to know what's being done, and it's important to know that as UX evolves and as it becomes more ingrained and more accepted, one of the nice truths about it is what you do really matters. Kind of like when I was talking about dark UX earlier, like, don't click the link, don't buy the thing, don't reward that behavior, because people are gathering data on your behavior. And if it stops working, they'll do something hopefully a little bit brighter. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of one of the nice truths of UX is your behavior, your digital behavior really can make a difference. It can really matter, and it can really start to shift that pendulum from information technology as a tool versus information technology using us as a tool. If we behave in a cogent manner, we can kind of get to that equilibrium where we're in symbiosis again, where we're giving enough data to be super futuristic, but we're no longer kind of tools of the system.
Oh, yeah. That's really good. Well, I have, just few personal questions. Are you a fiction reader or non-fiction reader?
Primarily fiction. I'm a voracious reader. I love reading.
Wow. So what is your favorite author?
I really like Stephen Erickson. Big fan of, when growing up, it was Clive Cussler, Michael Crichton, John Grisham. Lately I've been reading Stephen King, Tim Kuntz. Lately I've been reading a lot of like Robert Jordan, Brandon Sanderson, just a lot of different fantasy writers. Like, reading is kind of like my escape and my solace. It's something that I do daily, and I'm trying to hopefully generate that love for my daughters as well at home. But it's definitely something that I very much enjoy doing. And I'm mostly fiction, but I do a lot of nonfiction. A lot of my nonfiction stuff is around empathy, things like Brene Brown, or like UX and design sprints like Jake Knapp. So I try and sprinkle in some nonfiction here and again, but a lot of the nonfiction that I read is mostly to kind of help me with my blind spots and my weaknesses professionally, because it's always nice to kind of have that additional perspective, and it's in a very non-threatening manner. It's very easy for you to engage with that material without shields up, which sometimes happen in a corporate world.
So I would say that IT geeks, just normal people, they read fiction and they read Stephen King, and they enjoy reading fiction books.
There is an immense diversity among IT, and I know that IT sometimes carries kind of a connotation of like cannot interact with the outside world, little geeky. And don't get me wrong, I've had just as many conversations about Star Wars as I had of like trying to get this project across the finish line. So there is definitely some truth to that, but at the end of the day, they're readers, they're people, hopes and dreams. You got people lifting weights and people lifting books, and just everybody trying to enjoy the time they have.
Wow. Yeah. Well, at the end of our event, I'd like to thank you a lot. We're honored to have you today, and we hope we're going to have more events with you. And it was really conclusive, and I myself learned a lot from what you just said about UX design. And just if you have any question, please, don't hesitate to ask your question in comments or send it to RPL Ask a Librarian, and we will get back to you with answers. So thank you very much, and I would love to thank the team behind the cameras, my wonderful team. They're really great help and support. Thank you.